Tonight, the vote count has begun in the Republican caucuses here in Iowa, and it's looking like a razor-tight three-man race in this first battle for the GOP presidential nomination. Our campaign team is covering. We'll ask candidate Ron Paul about the D word. What do you think when you hear yourself described as a dangerous man?
I laugh at him.
The arsons that terrorized Los Angeles. Lee Cowan has the story of how the suspect was captured. And just hours before the caucus doors close, a lot of minds are still open. What is it that's preventing you from making your decisions?
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley, reporting tonight from Des Moines, Iowa.
And this is a special Western edition. Good evening. The votes are coming in from Iowa's Republican presidential caucuses, and it is looking oh so close. CBS News estimates that it is a three-way battle. Mitt Romney, Ron Paul, and Rick Santorum in that top tier. Take a look at the tabulated vote so far. This with just 22% of the vote in. Romney is ahead. Rick Santorum tied essentially. In the number 2 position there, Ron Paul comes in third and Newt Gingrich at 13%. Voters are going into the caucuses. They told us that the most important issue facing the country is the economy, followed by the federal budget deficit. 44% told us they didn't decide on a candidate until just the last few days. Our entire CBS News Campaign 2012 team is covering this very tight first contest in the race for the GOP presidential nomination. We're going to go first to Chief Political Correspondent Jan Crawford with the Romney campaign. Jan?
Well, Scott, Romney has arrived here at the Hotel Fort Des Moines, and his supporters are gathering, cheering as the results come in. And while it looks like a tight three-way tie right now, there is some good news in those polls of voters going into the caucuses. All those undecided voters, according to our polls, 37% of them are going for Romney. 27% are going for Rick Santorum. Now, this week, the candidate and the campaign have been striking an increasingly confident tone, but Romney also is emphasizing that no matter what happens tonight in Iowa, he is in it for the long haul. Listen to what he told me this week.
I'd love to have the support of the people here in Iowa, but I also recognize you have to go the distance. It's not just a 1 or 2 state contest. We have to go all the way till we have 1,150 delegates or so, and we're planning on doing that.
Now tonight, Romney's wife Ann and 4 of his 5 sons actually went to some of the caucuses, making the case that Romney should get their vote and should be the next Republican nominee. Scott?
Jan, thanks very much. Texas Congressman Ron Paul is in the top tier, in part because of support from voters that you might not expect. Wyatt Andrews is with the Paul campaign. Wyatt?
Scott, Ron Paul's campaign tonight is counting on strong support from Iowa's younger voters. Today, we asked several high school students to explain the Ron Paul appeal. Out in the crowd cheering Ron Paul was 18-year-old Mary Tobin, who trusts that Paul will reduce the deficit. At 18 years old, you're worried about the national debt?
Absolutely. I think it's going to impact me a lot more than it will impact a lot of the people who are making the laws right now.
Another high school senior, Jack Korb, likes that Paul is a libertarian and anti-war.
He believes in liberty, he believes in a non-interventionist foreign policy, and I think that's very important.
It may seem unlikely, Scott, but tonight those younger voters are a major part of Ron Paul's base.
Wyatt, and we're also getting information that there are more young people voting tonight than there were in 2008. Of all of the proposals that the Republican candidates have made, Ron Paul's would be among the most radical changes modern America has seen. We spoke with him today about how he would govern, and we started with questions of how Paul would have handled the financial crisis.
The most important thing that should have been done is no bailouts. Absolute no bailouts. The worst thing that could have happened is what we did.
How do you create jobs in this country?
You just get the government out of the way and produce an environment where business people would invest again. This is why I proposed a $1 trillion cut.
That's a $1 trillion cut in the federal budget. He proposes the trillion would come from eliminating federal departments such as energy and commerce, but half of it, $500 billion, would come from cuts in the Departments of Defense and State. Paul opposes military entanglements. When asked if it would be worth going to war to stop Iran from developing a nuclear bomb, he said, "We should do what we can." When you say do what we can, does that include using military force to prevent a nuclear weapon in Iran?
Absolutely not. I mean, we were able to contain the Soviets, and they had 30,000. What I worry about is people who shoot from the hip and don't think through things and start another war. Just think of how we got into Iraq.
You advocate the end of all foreign aid?
Sure. Except the voluntary type. Most people vote for foreign aid because they think they're going to help poor people in another country. It really doesn't happen that way. It props up dictators is what it happens.
Paul said that because of his foreign policy, some of his opponents have described him as a dangerous man.
Well, that's how desperate they are.
What do you think when you hear yourself described as a dangerous man?
I laugh at him. That, you know, if you defend individual liberty, if you defend sound money, balanced budget, the Constitution, and a foreign policy is sensible, oh, he's a dangerous man. You know what is a danger? Is somebody liable to go over and start a war against Iran with no clear intent. That is indeed real danger.
We polled voters as they went into the caucuses, and our poll is showing us, as Wyatt Andrews said earlier, young people are going for Paul. First-time caucus goers are also backing him, and also people who say they want a true conservative. Rick Santorum had a late surge in the pre-caucus polls. Our CBS News political director, John Dickerson, has been on the freezing campaign trail with the former senator from Pennsylvania over the last few days. John?
Rick Santorum is doing so well tonight, not just because he ran an Ironman campaign, 380 events in Iowa, but his message seems to be resonating. It's one he made to me in his last event before the voting began. He said he's the more conservative candidate, more conservative than Mitt Romney, and that's why he's the candidate who can beat Barack Obama.
What we've seen in past elections is that when we have bright contrasts, that's worked out well for conservatives and Republicans. If you say, well, we're willing to settle for something less than what America needs, and you haven't done your job of being bold at a time when our country needs big changes.
It looks like he has indeed been able to convince enough voters to be bold, and what he's hoping is his strong showing here will translate into a jolt of money, help him increase his organization for future states, Scott, like New Hampshire, where he will race tomorrow to start the next stage of the campaign.
John, thank you very much. To give you an idea of how close this is, folks, fewer than 100 votes separate Santorum, Romney, and Paul as of this moment. As we mentioned, CBS News polled voters as they went into the caucuses, and Anthony Mason has more about that. Anthony, what are we finding out?
Scott, we wanted to take a closer look at first-time caucus goers. In our entrance poll, 38% of Iowa Republicans described themselves as attending a caucus for the very first time. How did those first-timers vote? Well, they went strongly for Ron Paul, 37%. Santorum trailed with 21%. So first-timers, a key source of strength for Ron Paul tonight in Iowa. Scott.
Anthony, thank you. It's going to be a difficult night, it appears, for former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. His support has fallen in recent days, maybe because of the avalanche of attack ads that have been aimed at him. Dean Reynolds is with the Gingrich campaign tonight. Dean?
Scott, no great expectations here at Gingrich headquarters, and you could sort of sense during the week that he was having a hard time dealing with his sharp rise in the polls combined with his equally sharp drop. So I asked him if he'd learned any lessons in Iowa. What has the race taught you so far?
There's a very substantial number of people who want a positive campaign. And I think the fact that we've survived 3.5 million plus in negative ads from Romney is an amazing thing. I was surprised at how dishonest and negative Romney's campaign was going to be. And we're adjusting to it. By the time we get to New Hampshire, we'll have adjusted.
And Gingrich will be here in a couple of hours to speak to his supporters, and then he flies to Manchester, New Hampshire later tonight, where he is hoping to score some points in the two upcoming debates, at least to slow, if not completely end his slide. Scott?
The primary in New Hampshire is 1 week from tonight. Dean, thanks very much. We're joined now under the Capitol Dome here in Des Moines by Bob Schieffer, our chief Washington correspondent and anchor of Face the Nation. Bob, incredibly close race. What does that tell us?
Well, I think it tells us, this is making all of our pollsters very happy, because this is what the pre-polling showed, that it was going to be very, very close, that there's about 25% of the Republicans up here who like Mitt Romney and a bunch of Republicans who don't, very conservative Republicans. Right now, that very conservative vote is being split by Ron Paul and Rick Santorum. So the conservative folks have yet to coalesce around a single candidate. I think we're going to leave leave Iowa here about the same way we came. It's still muddled. There's still no clear favorite.
Romney is going to do well. He's going to finish in the top tier, it looks like, and he's already polling way ahead in New Hampshire for next week. What would it mean if he took both states?
Well, I think he would be just really in the catbird seat because except for incumbent presidents, no Republican has ever won both Iowa and New Hampshire. That would make him look very strong. But he's a long way from having won out here in Iowa, Scott. I think the losers here tonight are going to be Newt Gingrich, Rick Perry, Michelle Bachmann. Where do they go now? Newt Gingrich says he's going to New Hampshire. He's going to have a hard time, it seems to me, raising any money now if he finishes fourth behind these other people.
Bob, thank you very much. It was a fiery rant that led police to a suspected arsonist in Los Angeles. Wall Street begins a new year with a strong rally. And what is a caucus anyway? When the special Western edition of the CBS Evening News continues from Des Moines. We know more tonight about the man who police believe set a series of fires in Los Angeles last week. Lee Cowan has the details about the suspect and how the police caught him.
Harry Burkhart may have been his own worst enemy. The 24-year-old suspected arsonist was identified not because he was caught setting one of LA's 53 suspicious fires, but because U.S. Marshals remembered him from a tantrum he threw in this federal courthouse. LAPD Police Chief Charlie Beck.
I'm not going to get into any of the details of statements that he made.
The U.S. Attorney's Office says Burkhart's mother, Dorothy, was a fugitive and was arrested last week on a warrant out of her native Germany on 19 counts of fraud. Officials say her son, a German national himself, grew so agitated at one of her hearings, he had to be escorted from court. The next day, the arson spree started. And when this surveillance video was broadcast, U.S. deputy marshals recognized the figure immediately. The man who nabbed him, though, Shervin Lalazari, is being hailed a citizen hero.
I take a lot of pride in the city. I take a lot of pride in the department, and I think it's just a big relief that everyone can kind of go to sleep tonight and still be vigilant, but just kind of sleep well.
He's a reserve deputy, an attorney by trade, who had been volunteering.
I went on a ride along with the West Hollywood Sheriff Station when I was pretty young, and loved what I saw, loved what they did.
West Hollywood's mayor says he was paid just $1 a year.
$1 a year. I'm going to give him, the best dinner anywhere on the Sunset Strip for the extraordinary work that he did this weekend.
Now, Scott, back to that suspect for a moment, Harry Burkhart. He's expected to be arraigned on arson charges sometime tomorrow. And as for that reserve deputy, he says he can't wait to get back to volunteering and that $1 a year salary. Scott.
Lee, thanks very much. In New York City today, the police said a man confessed to a series of fire bombings there. Surveillance video shows the suspect throwing a firebomb at a Hindu temple, one of at least 5 attacks on New Year's Day that also targeted an Islamic cultural center. The police used video from another security camera to identify the suspect's car and track him down. Much of the eastern half of the country is in a deep freeze tonight. Arctic air from Canada has brought the coldest weather most of America has seen so far this winter. Along with the cold came the snow in Michigan and other places around the Great Lakes. And in Florida, it's been a race to get the strawberry crop harvested before it's damaged by frost. Oil prices jumped today after Iran made a new threat against the U.S. Navy. That story is next. Iran issued a warning to the U.S. Navy operating in the Persian Gulf. The White House said today that Iran's just lashing out because its economy is suffering under sanctions aimed at its nuclear program. We asked National Security Correspondent David Martin to look into whether Iran can back up its threats.
Iran wrapped up 10 days of naval exercises by warning the U.S. not to send an aircraft carrier back into the Persian Gulf. It may sound like an empty threat, but it's also clever propaganda. The USS Stennis left the Gulf last week headed for home and won't be back anytime soon. So Iran can claim the Stennis didn't dare return. But two other carriers, the Lincoln and the Vinson, are on their way to the region, and one of them is already scheduled to take part in exercises inside the Gulf. As they have in the past, the Iranians could harass the carrier with their go-fast boats as it transits the 2-mile-wide channel through the Strait of Hormuz, but their chances of stopping a carrier are close to zero. Over the last 10 days, Iran showed off anti-ship missiles, submarines, and hydrofoils to back up a claim they surely don't believe, that closing the Strait of Hormuz to the supertankers which carry 1/5 of the world's oil would be, quote, easier than drinking a glass of water. But the over-the-top rhetoric makes countries stop and think what would happen to their economies if a vital choke point for Mideast oil became a war zone. It's one of the few cards Iran has to play to discourage the rest of the world from enacting tougher economic sanctions against its nuclear program. Sanctions already in place are taking a toll on Iran's economy.
Today's saber rattling sent the price of oil up nearly $4 a barrel. So the threats may be empty, Scott, but they're not meaningless.
David, thank you very much. Those higher oil prices didn't shake Wall Street much, which is off to a strong start this year. After finishing 2011 with a gain of 5.5%, the Dow picked up 179 points today, or nearly 1.5%, on the very first day of trading on 2012. A number of positive economic reports drove stock prices higher. Did you ever have to finally decide why so many Iowa voters are having so much trouble making up their minds? Next. Back now from Des Moines, Iowa, you may be wondering, how does a caucus work? Well, voters gather by the dozens or hundreds in schools, churches, and Legion halls, and for about an hour, they hear speeches and then talk among themselves about the candidates. Then they write their choices on a ballot. Heading into caucus day, nearly half the voters said they hadn't made up their minds. And this morning, we found some of them in one of the usual places. The Drake Diner in Des Moines sees a lot of candidates in Iowa's face-to-face campaign. But the folks we met weren't persuaded, not yet. Only Pastor Brian Nolder has settled he's for Ron Paul. But undecided hours before the caucuses were law student Stephanie Ballard, engineer Ivan Reichert, marketing director Phil Tuning, and Pat Griffin, who's retired.
I don't see anybody that's outstanding. There's things I disagree with on some of them. They all seem to be missing something.
Let me have a show of hands. How many of you would like to have another choice other than the candidates you have before you? 2 out of 5 would like somebody else.
I think the Republicans shouldn't be, but are looking for an Obama-style candidate. Someone who comes out of nowhere, is charismatic, brings everybody to their feet, makes everybody say hallelujah. That's a very rare thing.
Phil, how about you? Why have you not made up your mind?
I think at one point I was looking for the perfect candidate, one that I could be enthusiastic about. However, at this point, what I've kind of looked at is who can actually win the general election.
Stephanie, what issue is at the top of your mind?
It's the economy, it's the size of government, the debt.
Is the economy at the top of your mind?
Economy is at the top of my mind. Secondly would be states' rights. I think that this next 4 years is going to be on the economy, is going to be getting the government out of our pocketbooks, I don't think the social issues are going to be at the forefront.
Phil, every time someone says the word economy, you nod your head. I wonder why.
Well, I actually think that's number one on the agenda as well. And secondly would be our debt. When you look at our debt as a percent of GDP, it's growing at an accelerating rate. We cannot continue to grow at that rate.
Now, Brian has made his decision. 4 of you have not, and I wonder what's going to help you make that decision in these closing hours. Stephanie?
It won't be the ads. I think tonight what's really gonna sway my vote either way is kind of listening to what other people have to say, which I think is what's great about the caucus, is you get to hear other people's points of view and things that maybe you didn't think of before.
The conversation at the caucus is going to help you. Ivan, you moved here from Texas in 2006. 2008 was your first caucus.
Yes, it was.
What did you think of it?
It's like you get to talk to them all, you get to see it all, and democracy happens right in front of your eyes. And you don't get that when it's just cold ads and you walk in and pull a lever in a primary.
And the first votes of 2012 are coming in. That's our special Western edition of the CBS Evening News from Des Moines, Iowa. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.